Remember when Jeremy Clarkson got the axe from Top Gear in 2015? The infamous fracas with a producer over a hot meal led to the BBC firing one of its biggest stars. But Clarkson's dismissal was just one high-profile example of BBC presenters getting sacked, often in controversial circumstances. So grab a cuppa and settle in as we examine the controversies, backlash, and personal dramas that led to once-beloved TV personalities being permanently removed from the BBC airwaves. Russell Brand. The Sachsgate affair rocked the BBC in late 2008 when Jonathan Ross and Russell Brand left lewd prank messages on veteran actor Andrew Sachs's voicemail about his granddaughter. The pre-recorded calls, which aired on Brand's Radio 2 show, sparked immense public backlash for their cruel and sexually explicit nature towards the 78-year-old Sachs. As the scandal exploded, Ross and Brand were suspended pending an investigation. BBC Director General Mark Thompson condemned their gross lapse of taste and issued a personal apology to Sachs and license fee payers. Ross's popular Friday night chat show was temporarily pulled from the air while Brand's radio show went on hiatus. Ultimately, when Ross's £6 million contract expired in 2010, the BBC declined to renew it, effectively firing one of its biggest stars over the debacle. While Brand soon left the BBC to focus on his flourishing film career, Ross had to slowly rebuild his reputation through subsequent TV projects before the corporation welcomed him back in 2011.
In the last few minutes, it's been reported that Carol Thatcher, a regular contributor to the BBC's One Show, has been dropped after she referred to a tennis player in the Australian Open as a golliwog.
Carol Thatcher's racist remarks. Just a few months after Sachsgate, another racism controversy embroiled the BBC's ranks. In early 2009, Carol Thatcher, daughter of former Prime Minister Margaret Thatcher, referred to a tennis player as a golliwog, a racist caricature, during a backstage conversation on The One Show. When hosts Adrian Chiles and Joe Brand, who witnessed the remark, condemned Thatcher's language as offensive, an official complaint was made to executive producer Tessa Finch. Though Thatcher penned an apology letter, the BBC opted to terminate her contract as a roving reporter on the show. BBC executives felt Thatcher's racist comments rendered her unfit for a program requiring frequent interactions with diverse audiences across the country. The incident was seen as a breach of public trust and violation of the broadcaster's values. While not outright banned from all BBC programming, Thatcher's opportunities rapidly dwindled after the controversy. Jimmy Savile's sex abuse scandal. One of the darkest chapters in BBC history involved former Top of the Pops host Jimmy Savile. After his death in 2011 at age 84, a jaw-dropping sex abuse scandal emerged over allegations that Savile had preyed on hundreds of young victims, some as young as 5 years old, over decades. An independent inquiry accused the BBC of unconscionable failures in allowing Savile's heinous crimes to go unreported and be covered up, enabling the predatory presenter to continue abusing with impunity for years. The revelation that Savile used his BBC stardom to groom and exploit vulnerable youths rocked the corporation to its core. The scandal sparked anguished soul-searching at the broadcaster about how such a prolific pedophile could exist undetected in its ranks for so long. Jonathan Ross's Lurid comedy show. Although he returned to the BBC after Sachsgate, Jonathan Ross courted fresh controversy in 2010 with his comedy show for BBC 4. Critics lambasted the program as crude, vulgar excess crammed with puerile adolescent sex gags. The show seemed to mock the very values the BBC claimed to uphold in terminating Ross over the Sachs prank call debacle just 2 years prior. While Ross defended it as mere bawdy comedy for an adult audience, detractors saw hypocrisy in the BBC giving him another high-profile platform so soon after fired for obscene humor towards an elderly man. Danny Baker's royal baby tweet fiasco. Veteran broadcaster Danny Baker's lengthy BBC career imploded in 2019 over an offensive tweet depicting a couple holding a chimpanzee's hand captioned, "Royal baby leaves hospital." The racist post about Meghan Markle and newborn son Archie led to Baker's swift firing from BBC Radio 5 Live, despite his claims that it was a misguided attempt at a satire about privilege, not racism. A BBC spokesperson deemed Baker's tweet a serious error in judgment that went against the broadcaster's values of respect and inclusivity, while the 63-year-old defended it as an injudicious joke about class rather than race. The damage was done mere days after Archie's birth. In the aftermath, Baker struggled to revive his career amid the reputational stain. He briefly hosted shows on other outlets like Times Radio, but never restored his former mainstream presence. Tony Blackburn's Radio 1 unceremonious firing. Among the most shocking BBC sackings was founding Radio 1 DJ Tony Blackburn's termination in the mid-'80s. After a near two-decade run hosting the breakfast and mid-morning shows, Blackburn had become a broadcasting icon and one of the original voices that defined the iconic station. But his stature at the BBC diminished until his outright firing in 1984, which Blackburn only learned about by chance from a commissionaire telling him he was, quote, leaving. It was an unceremonious, humiliating end, devoid of any gratitude for his pioneering role in Radio 1's formation and success. Blackburn moved to more adult-oriented, risque programming on BBC Radio London after his Radio 1 exile. But he felt pressured to push boundaries with even raunchier content and sexual innuendo, causing such severe stress he needed to seek professional therapy. He eventually resurfaced on commercial radio and reality shows like I'm a Celebrity, Get Me Out of Here, but his BBC dismissal underscored how the broadcaster often discarded its stars in unceremonious fashion. Jeremy Clarkson's violent Top Gear exit. Perhaps no BBC firing made bigger waves than Jeremy Clarkson's termination from the phenomenally popular Top Gear in 2015. The controversial host's downfall stemmed from an unprovoked physical assault on producer Oystein Timon during a shoot. Clarkson allegedly became incensed over not being provided a hot meal after a long day of filming. He proceeded to hurl verbal insults at Timon, including remarks mocking his Irish heritage, before inexcusably punching him in the face. Though Timon chose not to file an official complaint, Clarkson himself reported the incident. A BBC investigation concluded the violent outburst crossed a line, given Clarkson's lengthy track record of offensive, xenophobic commentary that sparked repeated backlash on Top Gear. As a result, the BBC decided not to renew the 54-year-old's contract when it expired later that year. This disgraceful ending brought Clarkson's 27-year run as the brash, politically incorrect face of the BBC's biggest show to an ignominious conclusion. His co-hosts, Richard Hammond and James May, soon resigned in solidarity. While some felt Clarkson's sacking was overdue given his history of crude behavior, others saw a double standard in how the BBC enabled him for years until abruptly cutting ties. His fans argued the corporation was making an example of him over a relatively minor fracas to appease critics. Now it's time to hear from you. Which of these scandals was the most shocking to hear about? Let us know in the comments section below.